So the process for the next 50 minutes of this first session is an opportunity for the panel who is assembled here to comment. And the way we're going to essentially approach this is we'll start with the Attorney General and a few comments specifically, and then I'm going to turn it to Senator Grassley and just work down through the list, asking each of the panel members at least one question. Hopefully we'll get through the first round. When I appear before the Senate, Senator Grassley has a little red light that tells me that I've got to stop after a couple of minutes. I can't go on and on. So, Senator, this is my time to put the red light on you. So I'm going to take advantage of that, although I'll probably pay for it later. So let me start the process with the Attorney General. And again, thank you for being here today. And I guess the first question, obviously, is as we begin this process and you look at the priorities that your department has as it relates to agricultural competition, maybe you could give us a sense of what those priorities are specifically and how we're going to move forward.
Sure. Just before I begin, but just as a point of accuracy, the person who's most likely to pay for this is me. Senator Grassley is one of the more active members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I'll be appearing before him in about 10 days or so. So I'm going to be extraordinarily nice to him over the course of the next hour or so. Remember that, Senator, how nice I was, okay? But the question that Secretary Vilsack asked is a serious one. And one of our first priorities was simply to work cooperatively with the United States Department of Agriculture on this series of agricultural workshops. We want to express our commitment to enforcing the antitrust laws in the agricultural sector, and we wanted to work with and take advantage of the deep expertise that exists within USDA. We want to learn more about agricultural markets and the agricultural sector generally. In order to do our work well, that is, to be good antitrust lawyers and other lawyers in the Department of Justice who might be involved in this work, we have to understand the nature of the industry that we are going to engage in. And who better to learn from than the United States Department of Agriculture. But we also hope to learn from other government officials, and I think most importantly from farmers and others who are working firsthand in agricultural markets. There are things that you all know on a day-to-day basis that you live, that we need to hear, that we need to understand if we are going to do our jobs as effectively as we can. I think we come here as friends. We come here as government officials who are not afraid to hear from you whatever is on your minds. For this dialogue to make sense, for this dialogue to really work, you have to be as frank as you can be, understanding that we are going to be receptive to that kind of interaction, to that kind of dialogue. My primary goal is to protect both farmers and consumers from anti-competitive activity. Antitrust enforcement provides increased opportunities for farmers when it is done right. And this woman will do it right. I promise you that. And we can also bring lower prices, better quality, and greater choice for consumers. There's not necessarily a tension between that, between those two goals. Maybe I could just mention a couple of the department's recent enforcement actions in the agricultural sector to give you a sense of what it is that we are doing. In January, we filed a lawsuit that challenged Dean Foods' acquisition of 2 dairy processing plants from Foremost Farms that inflicted higher milk prices on consumers. In late 2008, we filed a lawsuit to block JBSSA's acquisition of National Beef Packing Company. We concluded that the acquisition would lessen competition among packers for the purchase of feed cattle and thereby harm farmers who would get less for their cattle. This was going to be felt by consumers and bad for farmers as well. Now, another major goal we have is to enhance competition by working cooperatively with other agencies. It is not only the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice that are engaged in this endeavor. You look at the CFTC, the FTC, And we also have great cooperation with our state counterparts. That's why Tom Miller is such an important person in this effort. We are working closer than ever, though, I want to really emphasize, with the Department of Agriculture, with my good partner, Secretary Vilsack. We are working on regulatory initiatives and ongoing litigation to ensure that USDA's efforts to protect farmers are successful. We want to be good partners with USDA, but we also want to be good partners with all of you. We draw on the knowledge that USDA has of the agricultural market so that we can do our jobs and do our enforcement, do our advocacy better. But we will enhance our ability to do the job that you expect of your Justice Department if, as I said, we have a very meaningful, frank exchange of views, ideas, thoughts, and concerns this morning. I'm very glad to be here, and I look forward to interacting with all of you.
Senator Grassley, I don't think I have to necessarily introduce you to this audience, but I think it is important for folks to know your long-standing service to this country. Beginning in 1958, your service in the Iowa legislature until 74, and then you were elected to Congress in 1974, and then in 1980 elected to the Senate, where you serve as the ranking member on the Senate Finance Committee on Judiciary, Budget, Agriculture, and Joint Tax Committees. A farmer, someone who visits all 99 counties, and I think the question is, Senator, as you listen to Iowa farmers, as you travel around the state, let us know what your thoughts are about how competitive this market is and what concerns, if any, you have.
I'm prepared to do it, and I would ask for a point of personal privilege before my 5 minutes, because I think it's very important that people understand a process as much as substance, because I've been in Congress a long time, but I've not seen this sort of cooperation between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Justice Department, and I've saw it as badly needed in the past. So I think I want to compliment you, Secretary Vilsack, and you, General Holder, and your Assistant Attorney General Varney for doing this. It's badly needed, and the cooperation continued is very important as well. So I thank you for doing it. It fills a big void, as far as I'm concerned, in the issue of concentration and lack of competition within agriculture. Now can my 5 minutes start?
Absolutely. Okay. Just remember that when I'm testifying.
Okay. Well, it's obvious to me, because I've talked about it so long, so Iowans would not be surprised if I said that there's not enough competition, too much concentration, and I see it not only as a problem for today, but as a problem for young farmers getting started, getting into agriculture, keeping the next generation of family farmers strong. And I say all of this in the enhancement of the institution of the family farm. We use the term family farm often loosely, but I consider it a very important institution that's the basic of American agriculture, and that needs to be preserved. Bigger isn't per se bad, but it can lead to predatory business practices and behavior. And that's what we've got to be concerned about, and the legitimacy of government not being a partner, but for sure being a referee. More specifically, packer ownership of livestock is a problem, and I've been working on that a long time. But when you're up against the American Meat Institute and a lot of other strong people in Washington, D.C., it's difficult to get around that, so we haven't made much progress in that area. Secretary Vilsack already spoke about the statistics on the diminishing of the spot market. We need to take legislative action and or regulatory action to do that. We should not have very much, if any, mandatory arbitration. There ought to be alternatives. I think we have to have what goes on here at this meeting between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice ought to be formalized in some way, and so I bring to your attention my Agricultural Competitive Enhancement Act, ACE for short. Our bill would formalize this sort of dialogue because the U.S. Department of Agriculture being involved in with the Department of Justice, and I don't say this to denigrate anything that the Justice Department today is doing, but I think I can say under both Republican and Democrat presidents in the past that there has not been enough dialogue like you see today. And we need, and I hope that it leads to what I would call competition guidelines. I think these must be issued by the Department of Justice as it applies strictly to agriculture. And the ACE legislation would beef up antitrust enforcement. In the process of what you're doing, and we won't know down the road for several months till you get your hearings done, but I don't want anything to be done that stifles innovation, and I want to promote not only for agricultural competition, but this also applies to what we need to be doing through regulatory reform on Capitol Hill in regard to Wall Street and our financial institutions. We need more transparency. We need more openness in the market, and with transparency, I think you get accountability and you get a lot more self-regulation, and consequently then less requirement for people in USDA with Packers and Stockyards or with the Justice Department, what they have to do through enforcement of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. The Senator's reserving his time. I want to turn the podium now in the direction to Congressman Boswell, also someone who has served our country in the military with distinction. First elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1996. Prior to that, he was the president of the Iowa Senate, where I served with him and had the pleasure and privilege of doing so. He's been named the chair of the Agricultural Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, focused on crop insurance. He previously served as chair of the Agricultural Subcommittee on Livestock, Dairy, and Poultry. He knows quite a bit about farming. He's traveled throughout this state and throughout the country. Congressman, let me basically direct the same kind of question as I did to the Senator. Your thoughts and attitudes about the competitive circumstances that farmers have today and how fair and balanced the process is.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I'd like to have my personal point too for that. Follow the Senate here. We got to work together. So I hope you would think about that. But
equal rights.
Equal rights. Yeah, thank you, Mr. First off, I referred to talking with the Attorney General, I think, from Missouri a little while ago, and he said something about the fact that he was here, and we chatted a minute. And I said, well, I started there in Missouri, just barely. South of Lamoni or Davis City, Decatur County, on the first ridge into Missouri. I was born in a farmhouse, which stood until just last year. But anyway, I do have a few roots, if you will. But move on from that, I've known Secretary Vilsack as counselor, as senator, as governor, and candidate, if you will, and as secretary. I have to applaud the effort he's put forth in every category that I've known him in for all these years, and I just want to say that. And General Holder, we've not had this personal contact I've had with Secretary Vilsack, but I've followed you for a long time. Thank you for stepping up the plate and doing what you do. I appreciate it very much. We all do. Back to the situation here. It's very challenging. We know that. It's a challenging time. It's a historical time. And I look around the audience, which I have for a few moments, and I recognize a lot of faces, people I have engaged in conversation with over production agriculture and how we feed this hungry world. That's growing by 90 million, they tell me, every year. This is a big factor. It's a big thing. I personally think there's room for all the different avenues of production agriculture to participate. And we're still going to have to really scramble in our research and all the things we got to do to be able to do that. And I think we can. I believe we can do that. I'm an eternal optimist because I come from the farm. And I believe that. And I think we can. And so what you're doing here today is holding us together for us to sit down and to listen to each other and to talk about it and work it out. And I'm very proud to look out here and see these yellow shirts, the commercial food workers that, yeah. We can grow it, we can produce it, we can go through all this, but somebody has to, take it through the processing and the packaging and put it out there on the shelf. And these are the men and women that do that. We ought to be very appreciative of the efforts that they do. And look out here at President Denson and realize what this fine institution does for us and many things to do with agriculture and opportunity and the FFA. I talked to one of those young lads a little while ago. I said, I had a jacket like that, but I don't know where it's at right now, but it probably wouldn't fit me anyway. But, there is so much opportunity. But there is a big, big challenge. And we've just got to have the dialogue and be willing to talk together, and we can do this. We can. And so, Mr. Secretary, there's a need. I concur with many of the things that have been said already with my colleague, Senator Grassley. I've talked to Chairman Peterson of the Full Ag Committee from Minnesota. He understands what goes on out here as well as you do. And we're going to start the hearings next month, the field hearings on the next farm bill. And we're still adjusting to the current one, as you well know. But we did some things in the last farm bill that a lot of you, I think, are interested in. Senator Grassley mentioned, the mandatory arbitration and dealing with contracts and different things. So to get daylight on it, to get it out there where people can see what's going on and have fairness and opportunities for the producer, to deal with this contract agent or whoever and have fairness. And I think if we keep that in mind, that fairness and transparency, that we can do these things. And I am so pleased that we got two major research companies that worked very hard to try to be able to get us the opportunity to increase production and meet this hunger that's around this world, and it's going to grow. We got to have fairness and openness, and we can do this. So I'm hearing out there from the farmers that I have a lot of contact with, and many others, that stay on focus and make sure that we can do this to the best we possibly can do it. Whether it's the education process, the research process, the working together, the fairness, the openness, and so on, so this country of ours can continue to lead in this world with food production and doing the things we have been known for doing for a long, long time. We can still do it, but we got a big challenge right now. And you know what? I could spend another 5 minutes talking about that, but I want to yield back. I'm here to listen today. I want to learn. I want to go back to my committee. I want to go back to my chairman. And I want us to sit down and deal with the Senate and the House and those of you that meet all the different aspects of this and do the very best we can possibly do. And I think that's a good thing. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I first met Lieutenant Governor Judge in her capacity as a mediator during the farm crisis of the 80s when I was representing farmers who were being foreclosed on, and she was trying to keep farmers on the farm. We then served together in the Iowa Senate for a period of time. She was then elected as the first woman Secretary of Agriculture for this great state. Then in 2006, she was elected as our Lieutenant Governor. So in addition to having all of those elected offices and providing service as a mediator, she also, along with her husband, Senator Judge, have been in the farming business. So she knows a good deal about agriculture. Governor, let me ask you this question. As you deal with issues starting in 1980 all the way through the process, talk to me a little bit about the smaller producers and the challenges that you see smaller producers might have in this competition situation.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I'm not going to, since I'm not in Congress or the U.S. Senate, I don't know that I have to have such tight rules about my time. I mean, I'm a farmer from southern Iowa, and we talk pretty slow, but I did have a couple of great colleagues the time I spent in the Iowa Senate, and two of them are here with me today, Congressman Boswell and Secretary Vilsack, great friends, and it's good to see them again, and also to General Holder, it's good to have you back in Iowa. Come anytime. We like to have you here. I'm going to use the time to address the question that the Secretary asked me in two specific areas. because I believe that they are areas that need to be addressed, must be addressed if independent farmers are to have any opportunity for success in the future. And those two areas are, first of all, mandatory price reporting, and the second area is the availability of both short and long-term financing for independent farmers. 5 years ago, when I was in Secretary Northey's seat, Iowa made a great push to make some significant changes in the federal mandatory pricing laws. The changes that we were seeking were to bring fairness and transparency to the marketplace, to give independent producers valuable information that they have to have in order to make marketing decisions. Unfortunately, at that time, we were only able to make 4 modest changes that were incorporated into the new law. And I want to state that Iowa pork producers and Iowa Cattlemen's Association both worked very hard with many of us to make more significant changes than we were able to accomplish. The changes that were accomplished 5 years ago were the addition of a schedule for net price distribution, expanded sow and boar price reporting, and requirements that USDA ensure producers' confidentiality when they make an inquiry about packer reporting. Having said that, if independent producers are to have the transparency and access to markets, we know that mandatory price reporting law needs to include the addition of reporting of wholesale pork products, just as is done with boxed beef and boxed lamb today. In addition, the law should require greater scrutiny and disclosure of potential formula prices that may be being used to avoid reporting negotiated prices. It is my understanding that USDA recently began a quarterly compliance report, and that report is to include at a minimum, the total number of audits that have been conducted, the total number of violations that have been found, examples and descriptions of violations, and the number of packers required to report under the law by species, and notation of any unresolved violations or pending violations. Now, it is very important that that report is accurate, and it's very important that that report is readily accessible to livestock producers. It is also my understanding that in the 10-year life of the present reporting law, not one firm as of yet has been fined for a violation. With closer scrutiny and more timely reporting, violations must be identified and fines imposed as was intended. Mandatory price reporting is a critical part for the independent producer today, just as it was 5 years ago, and the next livestock reporting law that's passed and implemented by USDA should begin immediately for greater independence and authority to your audit and compliance branch from the market news and livestock and seed branch, because there is a feeling that that is perhaps too heavily influenced by industry groups. Finally, closer scrutiny of the formula, and I think Senator Grassley made reference to this, of the formula in forward contracting sales is needed to ensure that firms are not skirting the reporting of their negotiated sales. The second issue that I'd like to mention briefly is availability of financing for independent or small family farmers. With the tightening of credit requirements and consolidation of banks, which results in the loss of locally owned and community invested banks, and changes also in the Farm Service Administration lending policies. That all of those things have happened over a period of years since the farm crisis, and that sets up for us really a perfect storm that allows large vertical integrators to step in to avoid. And they literally then assume the role of banker to family farmers across this country. The integrator today is supplying feed, livestock, and in many cases, loans for construction of facilities for family farmers. And the farmers are, in fact, today supplying skilled labor. Although many find this system to be objectionable and believe that vertical integration is, in fact, a leading cause of our concentration problems, few farmers have the financial capacity to farm on their own and find themselves in a catch-22 situation. This situation will not change without a change in thinking on a national level regarding agricultural financing today. And I would suggest respectfully a review by USDA regarding your lending programs, both your direct and indirect loan programs, to see if there isn't some way that we can help bring some more stable financing for independent producers. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to say in response to the last comment that we actually have engaged in a recent review of the credit policies, and we have made some changes as it relates to poultry and pork producers and the relationship that they have with integrators to make sure that we're not undercutting the smaller independent producers and making it more difficult for them to access. In fact, we just in December issued rules on poultry and just recently applied those rules to pork. So we are cognizant of that, and we've also continued to focus on additional guarantee and direct loan opportunities and a more aggressive effort on beginning farmers. Let me turn the attention now to Attorney General Miller, if I might. General, you've established a farm division in your office, which I think has undertaken many cases to represent farmers who have been engaged and subject to certain circumstances that might constitute fraud or illegal activity. And what I'm interested in, from your perspective and what you've seen from that farm division, is what the most problematic aspect in marketing is relative to competition within this state from your perspective.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack, and thank you to Secretary Vilsack and Attorney General Holder for developing this relationship to deal with consolidation and concentration and antitrust in the agriculture area. Like all the other speakers, I think it's great in the public interest for a lot of reasons. But let me just mention one that's practical, and that is important. And that is that the antitrust law is fairly limited, and the current judiciary interprets it even more limited than many of us, Chris and I and others, think should be the case. So to combine antitrust and the authority of the USDA, which includes unfair practices and I think deceptive practices, is a very important combination and complement. It's a little bit like we do in the Attorney General's office in Iowa, that if we have a set of troublesome practices, we will look at the antitrust law, but if we can also develop a theory on the consumer protection law, we can have a much stronger case. So, you know, what you guys are doing is just great. And while this relationship is very important, Attorney General Holder mentioned another one that's very important in my view, and that is the relationship between the state attorney generals and the Department of Justice and the federal government. And let me tell you, this relationship today is the best that it's been in the history of the country. The relationship that we have with Chris Varney, working in antitrust, we've never had that kind of relationship before. We're working with many parts of the Justice Department in mortgage fraud, with Lanny Brewer, who's head of the criminal division, Tony West, who's head of the civil division. We're developing a partnership to work on these cases and work together to protect the public as never before. People like Tom Pirelli and David Ogden before he left, we work with very closely. I've been around, still a relatively young man, but I've been around quite a while, and I've seen many administrations, Democrat and Republican, and we've never had this kind of relationship of cooperation, openness, trust, and respect that we have today. So, General Holder, thank you very much for your working with the states in this really unique way, but more importantly, a way that's just so much in the public interest. In terms of concentration and competition in agriculture, we've had sort of a preoccupation, some would say an obsession, in our office in dealing with the contract producers and contracting companies, particularly in pork, but in seed as well. We've worked over a decade in this area. We started by developing a model contract in seed and in livestock. Neil Harrell was very important in that effort, and you'll hear from Neil, I think, this afternoon. I'm looking forward to his comments. Then we developed a growers or a contractor's Bill of Rights that we went to the legislature with to establish certain rights. We got close to passing that, but only got one part of it passed, and that was the priority of lean priority for the contract growers, contract producers in terms of the proceeds. But we don't give up. We had some settlements with Smithfield and others, and we incorporated many of those Bill of Rights into those agreements. Such things as the contracts have to be in plain language. You can't retaliate against a grower or producer if he or she is a whistleblower or engages in collective activity. You can't terminate the contract over a period of time if significant investment has been made. The agreement with Smithfield provided that they had to buy 25% of their pigs on the open market. So we've worked in that area, and it's a very important area. We were concerned initially that in hog production it would be like chicken in other parts of the country. Don't think that's happened. There is a certain amount of rights and ability to deal with these kinds of issues because of our efforts and the efforts of many others. But we continue to think that that's an important relationship, one that has to have some balance and some respect and authority for the farmer. With some of the other AGs, we've filed some comments. We're among those, did you say 15,000 comments that have been made? We've joined those comments, and you'll hear from three of my colleagues this afternoon, including Attorney General Steve Bullock of Montana. He's the principal author of these comments. We joined in them, worked with him, and he'll talk more about them. But it covers the range of issues dealing with concentration and competition in agriculture, including seeds, grain transportation, cattle, hogs, chicken, and dairy. So Steve is here with Chris Koster, the Attorney General of Missouri, the Attorney General of Ohio. Rich Cordry will join him this afternoon, and you'll hear more about our statement here from them, and particularly Steve, who's taken the lead here. But finally, I would mention competition in regard to seeds. This is an issue that's before the agriculture community and before all of us. There was a recent AP story that I thought was very comprehensive that indicated that in soy and soybeans, Monsanto seeds, their wonderful trait that's Roundup Ready resistant, was in 95% of the seed in soybean, about 80% or maybe 82% in corn. Additionally, we've heard reports of price increases in seed this year. Initially, as much as 40%. That didn't seem to bear out, but perhaps 25 to 30% has been the price increase, although a little more research has to be made there. So Monsanto's place in seed is something that's a competitive issue that's before all of us, and that we've acknowledged that we're working on. Monsanto has acknowledged that the Justice Department is working on. So I certainly would mention Secretary Vilsack and Attorney General Holder that issue. And finally, Tom, welcome back. We're proud that you're in this cabinet. We're proud that you're the Ag Secretary, and we're proud of the things that you do in that office.
It's hard to believe that Tom Miller was first elected as our Attorney General in 1978, and I can tell you I've traveled around the country and visit with a lot of Attorney Generals and a lot of officials. Believe me when I say this, he is considered to be one of the foremost Attorney Generals in this country, so we are fortunate to have him serve us and for as long as he has served us. General, thank you. Someone who has also, I think, received a lot of attention nationally is our Secretary of Agriculture. I want to turn to him now. I think folks know that Secretary Northey is a fourth-generation Iowa farmer, grows corn and soybeans in a farm near Spirit Lake. He started with his grandfather, Sid, after graduating from Iowa State. I've had an opportunity to spend a good deal of time with the Secretary in Washington, D.C. on a variety of issues, and I think we have a very good and positive relationship. And so, Mr. Secretary, let me ask you, as you really focus on your day-to-day activities, I know that you're concerned about this issue of competition and consolidation and people getting a fair shake in the countryside. Your thoughts about the current competitive circumstance in Iowa and what you think we ought to be focused on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having this hearing here. I appreciate it very much. Great to have a room full of Iowans and others here as well. It certainly is an important issue and something that needs to be talked about. As I get around the state, talk to a lot of folks about what's going on in ag, and one thing consistent about agriculture is it changes. But certainly changes in the last 10 years have been fairly dramatic. Iowa's still #1 in corn and soybean production. It's a very logical place to have these conversations. Spend some time talking about those inputs and what the impact has been in the last few years on inputs and the impact on producers. One of those things that I hear from producers out there as a concern is, as General Miller mentioned, was concerns about price increases in seeds. We've seen those price increases. In fact, about 10 years ago, roughing out the numbers, we probably spend a little less than $1 billion a year as Iowa farmers on seed. We plant about 13 million acres of corn, 10 million acres of soybeans. That number is probably closer to $2 billion a year right now. Now, in that same time, we've actually seen a dramatic increase in the value of what we produce as well, prices and yields. And so we went from about $5 or $6 billion a year, maybe $7 billion a year of crop production valued in the state to now we sell about $10 billion worth of crop. We probably produce about $12 billion worth of crop, so we've nearly doubled the amount, in part because of prices, in part because of yields. Certainly that new technology has been a part of that. That's really helped. The demand that we've had overseas and certainly in our ethanol plants have increased the value, and that has been part of the reason that the higher technologies that bring better yields have increased in value to the producer. If you're getting $2 a bushel, and you get 20 extra bushels by doing something, that's worth $40 an acre. If you're getting $5 a bushel for that corn, then that's worth $100 to you. So splitting that difference or sharing that makes some sense. Now, we've also seen the price of that drop, that crop drop a little bit. We haven't necessarily seen the price of those inputs drop, and I think that's the concern that I hear of producers out there. There's always this tension, certainly, in not wanting to lose the encouragement of developing new technologies. Certainly, corn and soybean producers have seen a lot of new technologies as we compare our industries to wheat and some of the other products out there that haven't been a way for investment to happen and get a return on investment in those other industries. We do see benefits here. But as you compare and contrast, we kind of talk about three sets of inputs. We talk about, as far as crop production, we talk about our seed, we talk about our weed controls, our herbicides, and we talk about fertilizer. And they each have different personalities. Seed certainly has increased in value, and we've seen that technology, and there's certainly increasing in price as well. Herbicide has been more flat. It actually has gotten some additional competition from seed, Roundup Ready and other kinds of things. And so that cost of controlling those weeds has been fairly flat and probably generated less investment in part because of that as time has gone on as well. And then you contrast that with fertilizer. We've seen some big movements in prices of fertilizer the last few years. 2 years ago, we had record high fertilizer prices. Certainly there's always this concern of how narrow is that production capacity to that fertilizer. Are there folks out there that can set prices? I sure felt like it at the time, 2 years ago, as we saw $1,000 anhydrous ammonia and high costs of P and K as well. And yet, fertilizer is very, what we sometimes call fungible. It can move around, and there's an international market for it. And although it may not quickly come back down in price, it certainly has come back down in price. And so each of these have their own characteristics in how they act. And we've seen fertilizer have a competition that has brought that price down to some extent. There's still concerns both at the local level, how many folks do you have to buy the stuff from, as well as the national or international level of how many producers are there out there. But we've certainly seen, because of an international impact, that prices have come back down again from their peak as well. So there's a tension in all these areas. They each have their own personalities. I think we have to look at them each differently. They certainly impact producers, and for producers that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, were producing $250 or $300 an acre, and now we're producing $700 or $800 an acre. Inherently, there's some increases in costs there, but that doesn't necessarily answer the question of whether we have competition. I guess one last point would be on the selling side. It's been an interesting time as we've added, certainly during your tenure, Secretary, as governor, we've added ethanol plants. We've actually added markets to the corn demand out there. We've maybe reduced and consolidated some of the grain buyers that are out there. Some of the co-ops have gone together, and so in some areas we see less, but at the same token, we have 39 ethanol plants in Iowa. We produce more ethanol in the state than anybody else does. Those are new markets that didn't used to be there, and that competition is, in some cases, created a stronger market, a market that's closer to the Chicago price. We talk about the difference between the local price and Chicago price as the basis. That has tightened up as we've gotten more competition. So certainly competition works, but we have a lot of concern in the livestock industry from folks. Got to always balance this tension between competition and efficiency, and that's one of the challenges that you all have as we listen to the folks and folks outline specifics in each of those areas. So thank you for being here and the chance to say a few words.
We have 6 minutes left, so this is the same question to all of the panelists, and obviously you get, Christine, I'm going to give you a chance to close. I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity. If there was one issue or one improvement that you would want us to focus on specifically as part of this conversation, what would it be? Senator?
I think to make sure that the arrangement that this meeting and your series of hearings exemplify, that we formalize the arrangements between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice to work together. And from my standpoint, that means I've been critical of past Departments of Justice maybe not paying enough attention to agriculture, not enough institutional knowledge of agriculture to help that, and to formalize it some way so that when we have questions of the antitrust laws being enforced, that there's input from the Department of Agriculture on that point. And then, even though it might not be a part of this discussion, but more vigorous enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act.
Okay. Congressman?
Well, let me concur with Senator Grassley, but market transparency, I just mentioned this to the very important that you be able to know what you're dealing with as you're trying to make the sale and so on. The market transparency, and it's quick, it's up to date. And then as we go into this next farm bill, which we're going to start right away, as I mentioned, that we take advantage of the input from everybody that's doing the hands-on, regardless of what part that you're playing in agriculture. For example, fruits and vegetables, before this last farm bill, they said, leave us alone. But in this farm bill, they came to the table, which was their right to do so. And it was reasonable. And so I'm concerned about what's happening to our baseline in production agriculture as we go in this next farm bill for what we had to reduce the last time and what we're looking at we may have to do now because of risk management and so on. So I guess I've added 2 or 3 other things.
Okay, very good. Governor?
I think it's been said. I hate to make this, just keep being unanimous here, but market transparency is critical as we go forward. And I would also say, as Senator Grassley said, that it is also critically important that the Packers and Stockyards Act is enforced, and that cooperation between your agency and General Holder's agency will be critical in that.
General Miller?
Well, I'm a lawyer, for better or for worse, so this is a little technical, but I'll try and make it as understandable as possible. There's two parts of dealing with these concentration issues, as we've discussed. There's the antitrust law, and there's the other provisions, including under Packers and Stockyards, the unfair practices. I think on that side, you need to, and we need to work with you to more develop the non-antitrust laws to deal with concentration. And obviously you're talking about that, but there's more that can be done there, and that law can be explored. On the antitrust side of it, it goes back to a breakfast meeting that we had with Chris Varney, the Attorney General, Steve Bullock, Chris Koster, and myself, and probably 25 other AGs, about antitrust law generally, that the interpretation of the antitrust law swings. And in the 60s and 70s, it swung to a point where enforcement, its breadth was very broad. And then it swung back to a very narrow interpretation currently. And what we talked about is how we can bring cases and how we can do things to try and bring the antitrust law back more to the middle. The interpretation by the judiciary, a big challenge. But I think that's a very important part of any kind of antitrust enforcement that Chris and the Attorney Generals and John Leibowitz, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who's also an important player here, we've talked about, and hopefully we can work on.
Okay. Secretary?
Let me just add one issue to the mix here, and I think most of these issues we're looking back on, and we're looking at what has happened, but we actually have an issue that's coming at us that we have a chance to kind of set the stage for, and that is some of these biotechnology traits will come off patent. And the understanding of how to put those, or how we treat those as they come off patent that's fair to the companies, fair to the industry, and fair to producers, I think we actually have an opportunity to be able to set the stage and the arrangements for that in a way that's proactive before that happens, that could be very constructive to producers and companies decades into the future.
Okay. Well, I'm going to finish this segment by asking the Assistant Attorney General, Christine Varney, to make a few comments in her role as she looks at antitrust laws protecting farmers, smaller operators, and consumers. Christine, be interested in your thoughts about next steps.
Thank you so much, Secretary. If I can start by addressing what the panelists asked that they would like to see, and I can absolutely commit on behalf of myself and my boss, the Attorney General, Senator Grassley, that you will continue to see the unprecedented cooperation and collaboration between our office and the USDA. We have, as a matter of fact, I have hired someone formerly from the State Attorney General's office in Texas, Mark Toby, who's here today, who specializes in agriculture. I have a deputy assistant, also here today, Phil Weiser, who specializes in agriculture. Bill Stallings, who's the lead of our agriculture enforcement team, a longtime career lawyer, is here in the back. So you have our commitment to work with all the folks that are here from USDA in an unrelenting quest to find the right balance for farmers, producers, consumers across the whole agriculture chain. We're going to do that in this administration. To Congressman Boswell, market transparency. We care deeply about transparency, and Lieutenant Governor, we understand that transparency helps maintain a competitive marketplace. So you can be sure that we're going to be working closely with USDA to figure out where our law, our jurisdiction, and their law and their jurisdiction overlap so that we can get as much transparency as is possible into the system. Packer and Stockyard Act enforcement. USDA has tremendous expertise here, but we got a lot of lawyers at DOJ that can back you up. So we're looking forward to and have started the conversations on the staff level of how we can work collaboratively to ensure the federal government is taking full advantage of the authority that's delegated to us in the Packer and Stockyard Act. Biotech, things coming off patents. You know, patents have in the past been used to maintain or extend monopolies, and that's illegal. And you can be sure, Secretary, that we are going to be looking very closely at any attempt to maintain or extend a monopoly through an abuse of the patent laws. So that's generally, I think I can assure each member of the panel. I've been working with Attorney General Miller for not quite 30 years, but for a long time, and he knows that he can continue to count on the offices of the Department of Justice and the Antitrust Division to work across the board on issues as they confront the state attorneys general, not only in agriculture, but really, you folks are on the front lines, and your attorneys general are the people that we look to understand what is affecting you in your life every day and what's our appropriate role to support the attorneys general or to collaborate with them, and we will continue to do that. I got here a few minutes early, so I was able to talk with a lot of folks that are here today. I got to talk with the food and commercial workers for a while. I got to talk with a lot of farmers who are out here. My friends from the co-ops are here. And there's a couple of things that I would say. You touched on it a little bit. The first question was, what can antitrust really do? Well, there's a number of things. When we see mergers, we look closely at the resulting concentration from a merger. As the Attorney General referenced, we've recently sued Dean Foods because we think it resulted in too much concentration in milk in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan, and we were joined by the Attorneys General in those states in suing to break up that merger to try and get competition back in to get a better price to farmers and lower prices to consumers. We did JBS last year, same thing. We will continue to carefully and closely scrutinize every single merger that comes before us, look at it on its facts, and make a decision on the facts of the merger. If it doesn't result in undue concentration and a lessening of competition and provides efficiency and helps farmers and growers get better prices and get more efficiency in what can get to consumers, that'll be okay with us. But those that don't, we will stop. They will not go through during this Department of Justice. The other thing that we look at, and a lot of you have talked to me about this morning as I moved around, big companies in the chain, wherever they are, and your views about how much power they have. Well, as one of my panelists said, look, in the United States, I think it was Senator Grassley said, big is not bad. But with big comes an awful lot of responsibility. When you have a tremendous amount of market share, you have the responsibility to behave in ways that keep the competitive playing field open. You cannot engage in acts that are designed to protect or extend your monopoly. So we look very, very closely across all sectors wherever you see an enterprise that has enormous market power. And, America is a great country because we have not only great farmers and great small entrepreneurs, but we've grown some of the best companies in the world that are worldwide leaders. And for the most part, I believe those companies take their obligations under the antitrust laws very, very seriously. But we take very seriously our obligation to enforce those laws, so we look very carefully. The final thing I would say is something I think a lot of you and I are familiar with. We have criminal authority in the Antitrust Division, and it is illegal for competitors to sit down together and fix prices. That's what you saw. I don't know if you all out here have seen the movie that's just come out called The Informant, and it's a movie about the lysine cartel. And we will, wherever we find, particularly in the international sphere, wherever we find price fixing like that, we will prosecute that criminally. So you have my commitment that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's a competitive agriculture economy, that farmers, growers, packers, processors are all making a decent wage, and we're getting American consumers food on their table that's safe and healthy at a decent price.
General, before we break for a short break, do you want a few concluding comments?
Well, you can see why I have such confidence in this woman, right? I mean, I would say that what we're looking for is, as I think everybody's indicated, transparency, so that everybody has a fair look into what's actually going on. But the overriding concern that we have at the Justice Department is maintaining fairness. It doesn't mean we're going to put our thumb on the scale. We want everybody to have a fair shot. I think Senator Grassley is right, as Christine indicated. Big is not necessarily bad, but big can be bad if the power that comes from being big is misused. And that is simply not something that this Department of Justice is going to stand for. We will use every tool that we have to ensure fairness in the marketplace. It is important because at the end of the day, this is a national security matter. We talk about national security things and the ways that terrorism and all that. If we do not have a strong economy, a strong agricultural sector, this country is not as strong as it can be, as strong as it needs to be. And for us, this is a priority in this Justice Department. We are going to use all the tools that we have, the attention that we can generate in cooperation with our partners at USDA to make sure that we are as effective as we can, that we are as responsive as we can be in dealing with the issues that you confront on a day-to-day basis. At the end of the day, and as we look back on our time in this administration, I hope we'll be able to say that we had a measurable impact on the lives of people in this state and other places, that their day-to-day lives, that because of what we did, their lives have improved. And we don't lose sight of that. We talk about big and lofty ideals and projects and programs, but we never lose sight of the fact that what we're talking about are our fellow citizens and how they live on a day-to-day basis. And so those are our guides. We are, as I said, bound and determined to do the right thing as we learn what the right thing is, and we want your input as we are trying to develop the policies that we will implement.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists. We're going to reset the panel to invite a number of farmers from this state and from other states to comment in the next panel discussion. It'll take us about 15 minutes or so to do that, so we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Again, thanks to all for a very good discussion this morning.